be able to bring you an interview with a colleague, Dr. Ralph Brockett at the University of Tennessee. In a full disclosure, I must let you know that we have been friends and colleagues for over 3 decades. So Ralph is with us this morning, and Ralph, why don't you introduce yourself to the students?
Okay, Raj. Good morning, everyone, and I'm glad to be here with you today. And even though you'll be seeing this a little later than as we're making it, I hope you're having a good semester, and look forward to spending some time here and sharing some thoughts. As Raj said, we have worked together for a long time, and in fact, many years ago, long before we were co-authors and very close friends and so forth, he was my major professor and has a lot to do with me being here today, to be honest. So I'm gonna, that's my self-disclosure. As a little bit of background, I am in my 32nd year as a professor, just starting it, and I just finished my 25th year here at the University of Tennessee. I'm a professor in the Department of Educational Psychology and Counseling, and my specialty is adult learning and adult education. Before that, I was at Montana State University for 4 years back in the late 80s. And before that, I was at Syracuse for 3 years as a student and 2 years as a faculty member. So that pretty much takes me back to the late 70s. I've been here at the University of Tennessee. As I say, I've been a professor for 25 years. And from 1993 up until about last spring of 2012, I was the program coordinator for adult education and later adult learning, and stepped down from that role probably temporarily, and I'll probably be in that role again at some other point, but took a little bit of a break from it because I had some writing that I wanted to work on and some other things, and one of my colleagues was gracious enough to say, I'll do it for a while. So that was really nice. Let me tell you a little bit about program coordinator, what it is and what it isn't in my experience, and some of the things that I did in that role. And I'm assuming, Roger, that you'll jump in any time with comments and and feedback along the way. What the program coordinator is not is, it's not being the department head. It is it doesn't have budgetary responsibility for the most part, and really don't have supervisory responsibility. What it really is being a facilitator of the process, and basically a first among equals. So what I would do in that role is, we have 3 people who work in the adult learning area, 2 colleagues, myself, and as coordinator, my role was to call people together, to hold meetings, to coordinate meeting times, get us together, and talk about, share issues that we needed to deal with. And of course, my colleagues would bring in their issues, and sometimes one or more of them would actually have the main topics of the meeting. As coordinator, basically what I would do was work with admissions. If a new student was a prospect looking at the program, I would probably be the one to meet with them first. I would, let's see, I would help work the admissions process. And if we admitted a student, I would go to the other faculty members and we would make a decision about who would be the advisor. The way we worked was not that the coordinator would assign people, or in doing course scheduling, I didn't say, okay, your course is going to be at this time. What we would do instead is sit down and look at the schedule, what was needed, and when people felt they were best able to teach the class, and we would work that out together. And so, again, it's really more of a facilitator role. Sometimes we will have curriculum issues like adding a new course to the curriculum or deleting an old one or revising a course. And again, the faculty member who mainly teaches the course would do most of the work on that, but the coordinator has to take it to the department and get it approved and make sure everything is in order. There's a fair amount of paperwork, and if the department head needs information or a report, it usually goes to the coordinator, and sometimes the coordinator turns to the graduate assistant and says, I need some help with this, and can you find out this for me, and so forth. And then my job would be to give it to the department head. Another role that I would have is to communicate with students. And again, the graduate assistant who works with the program is usually the main conduit between the students and the program, because it's nice to have that connection, and students, I think, feel more responsive when it's a fellow student who's the one who is who's making the contact. Although, I'm the one who sometimes sends things out and then asks the graduate assistant to send things. And finally, another role is to meet with the program coordinators and the department head on a regular basis. When I was program coordinator, we had a monthly leadership team meeting, and we would meet like on Wednesday mornings, and then that afternoon we'd have a department head meeting, or a department meeting, full department. And so I was involved in that as well. Again, for me, the coordinator is different from being a department head. In our department, it's more of a coordinator, a facilitator, and a person who helps plan. So that's basically the role that I would take.
Well, Ralph, I know in an earlier conversation that we had prior to this particular recording, you had talked about the fact that you had served in a role as the chair of the Universitywide Graduate Council there at the University of Tennessee. Mm-hmm. Could you describe to us some about that particular council or university-wide activity and what your role as the chair of that was?
Sure. Our graduate council is a college-wide body. It serves under the faculty senate, but it also is advisory to the graduate school. So it means working closely with the dean and the associate dean of the graduate school. And the graduate council basically determines policy sometimes, and sometimes makes recommendations to the dean. So it's a little bit of both, and it works mainly through committees. For example, the Academic Policy Committee deals with aspects of the graduate catalog that are admission related and degree requirements, basic general graduate school-wide requirements. The Curriculum Committee reviews course changes, additions, deletions, and is responsible for making sure that the curriculum throughout the university, throughout the graduate school, is in place. There's a credentials committee that recommends faculty for ability, the status to direct dissertations. When at our university, you have to go through a review process that shows that you've been keeping up on scholarship and been active as an advisor, and that's something I think initially it's for 5 years, and then it's reviewed every 10 years. And this committee looks at the credentials and makes recommendations to the full graduate council. And again, it's mostly going through the process, and by the time it gets to the graduate council, there's usually very little question. The committee has done its work. Finally, there's a committee that handles appeals, and that's more ad hoc. If a if a student makes an appeal, the assistant dean of the graduate school will put together a committee, and then the appeals committee chair is there and runs the meeting, and make a decision whether or not there needs to be a hearing, and if there is, that same group holds the hearing. And I've served on that a couple of times as a member of the council and been involved in those situations. But as chair, once again, my role is basically to be a facilitator. I felt that if the committees were doing their work and bringing things to the council, that my job was just to make sure things kept running smoothly. And I had to represent the council every month before the faculty senate, present the minutes of the last meeting. I also served on the executive committee of the faculty senate, which means I got to meet monthly with all of the chairs of the committees. The provost, the chancellor were usually there, and there were a few times where the provost, who is the chief academic officer in our graduate school, in our university, and she would sometimes ask me to do certain things and work on certain tasks, and so I did that as well. So mostly as chair of the graduate council, I attended a lot of meetings and chaired one every month, and I tried to make it to all. Each of those committees that I mentioned meets about every month, except appeals, which is ad hoc. But I would try to make those meetings as much as I could, and made most of them over the last year. So I basically spent the last year going to meetings, and this year I'm the past chair as of August 1st, and so I'll still be coming to the Senate, but I won't have a lot of other roles. I'll probably be more advisory than anything, but I do have one more year to serve in that role. And again, that was a nice honor to have. I haven't done a lot of university committee work over my years. I've mostly worked in the department and in my professional associations. So getting the chance to, I was on graduate council as a member for many years, but getting the chance to serve as chair was a nice honor, and it was something that surprisingly, I enjoyed it a lot more than I thought I would, actually. It was a good role to have. I'm committed to graduate study and making sure that graduate students are served as well as possible, and this gave me a chance to do something to help with that. I don't know if that's enough to give you a basic idea, but
well, that is, Ralph. Thank you. And remembering back to my own days as an administrator and faculty member, it seems to me I spent more time in committee meetings sometimes than I did anything else. So appreciate your sharing with candor some of your own plenty of time spent in committee meetings. One of the topics that we are examining in this course 671 this semester, it's talked about in various ways in our textbook and some of the online resources, is the whole notion of tenure and what that means. There are pros and cons. A lot of discussion about whether or not tenure should remain in the form that it is. Should it become something else? And I'm just wondering, as a long-term faculty member and a long-term faculty member with tenure, what some of your views are on that particular topic.
Okay, well, now that's something that we could go on and on about, and I hope that you all in your class do take an opportunity to talk about this in some depth. Tenure is a very important issue. It's a very sensitive issue, I think. From the outside, people will say, why should professors have tenure? And that kind of job security, it doesn't exist in the business world. It doesn't exist in most worlds. The thing about it, the historic reason for tenure is academic freedom. When people are working in an area of scholarship, sometimes it becomes political, sometimes as a researcher you may be dealing with areas that may be unpopular. And to push back the boundaries of knowledge, sometimes you have to go into areas that the majority of people may, or not even the majority, but certain segments of society may not approve of or like. You know, sometimes people in political science look from the right, or the political right or left. In education, you have people dealing with education for social change and feminism, and dealing with issues of racism and homophobia in the classroom and bullying. Scholars who work in these areas ideally should have some kind of protection so that their jobs are not in jeopardy because they may be publishing things that maybe their dean or their department head don't necessarily agree with. So it's the idea that to have the free exchange of ideas, we need to have a mechanism so that faculty can feel free to pursue their interests and to do the scholarship that is going to increase knowledge. That's the basic underlying emphasis of tenure. My view, and I've been tenured since I received tenure in 1990. So I've had it for a long time, and I think it's a valuable mechanism in higher education. To be sure, there are times when it's abused. I mean, there's a term in the academic world sometimes called deadwood, and we do have some faculty who basically get tenure and don't do much else afterwards. So that does exist, but there are mechanisms in place to deal with that as well, so that if, you know, like at our university we have a faculty handbook and we are evaluated each year, and if someone is evaluated very low for a couple of years consecutively, it's possible to take action to have that person's tenure revoked. So there are mechanisms in place. But again, I think tenure is valuable. I have served as a member of the Promotion and Tenure Committee here on 2 different terms for probably a total of 7 years, and I've been chair for 3 or 4 years in 2 different times. And I was chair most recently about 5 or 6 years ago. And so what happens is a process that begins at the department and goes from there to the college level. And at this university, the dean is the next level, and then the provost, and then the board of trustees has to make the final vote. Now, ideally, if a faculty member is productive and doing well, it's like an unbroken chain. And hopefully, if the department supports the person and their record is strong, it should go through the college, the dean should support it, and so on, up the line. Now, of course, sometimes it doesn't happen that way for a host of reasons. And, you know, as I say, I've been on promotion and tenure at the university level, and or not at the university, at the college level. And there have been a couple of times when I have been on the committee when people have not received tenure, and there were reasons for it. You know, I can't go into details about specifics, but when you look at things, you see the record, and you see over time that the person maybe given feedback that they needed to improve some things, and if they didn't, you know, there's a chance they may not make it. I will say this: it's tougher today to get tenure than it was when I did, and I'll go so far as to say it's probably tougher for me in my day than it probably was in the 70s when other people, including my good friend Raj, went up. Although that doesn't mean that people aren't qualified, but I think some of the expectations are different. It would be harder for me to get it today than it was. There's more pressure to publish than there was back in my time even. There's more pressure to get grant money. So But again, I basically think tenure is an important concept. I think it's an important way to make sure that good quality scholarship continues. And even though there are sometimes abuses, it's still it's a trade-off, and I think it's worth the trade-off to have it. But I also think it's important for universities to make sure that they're monitoring and have a mechanism in place so that faculty basically can't retire in place, that they do have to remain active. And that would be important for quality in higher education, especially today when budgets are so tight and there's so many changes going on in the world of higher education.
Well, Ralph, I appreciate that. As you've discussed in this interview thus far, you've talked about your role as a faculty member, but how you have actually been engaged in throughout the university in various kinds of ways in terms of committees and being on council and so on. And one of the activities that my students will soon be doing in working in teams or small groups, they're going to be picking out a university or a college and creating an organizational chart showing the whole structure of a particular college or a university, from the top president or chancellor on down to faculty and staff. So you helped us to get a bit more insight into that. You said one thing that you found yourself enjoying a bit more than you had anticipated serving on this graduate council. And do you see yourself in the future seeking or being asked to serve in higher roles, department chair or into central administration? How do you feel about that as a faculty member in terms of something that could be in your future?
Well, it's one of those things that nobody knows for sure. I do know that I have accepted 2 commitments at the university next year of committees, one of which is, and I actually kind of volunteered myself for this one. I don't know why, but I did. And it's to look at the faculty evaluation, teacher evaluation process. I was on a committee many years ago that helped put in place the current system, and they're now looking at it again. So when the faculty senate president was looking for volunteers or recommendations, I opened my mouth and said, well, I was involved the last time. I probably could share some things from that experience and probably have some background. So, of course, I got asked to do that. And we are also going up for our SACS accreditation process, which is our accrediting body that looks at the university. And I'm on a team doing some writing for some of that, which is something that I don't know much about, but I guess I will learn. As far as other roles, I'm not actively seeking anything, but I'm also at a point, in the past, I interviewed for a couple of department head positions at other universities, and I did one 10 years ago, and I did one 20 years ago. So, I have looked at it a couple of times. It wasn't the right time, and it didn't work out right, and I'm here where I'm glad I am. But I'm not saying I wouldn't consider that in the future. I think it would be an interesting challenge. I love teaching my classes. I love working with students. As I say, I've done it for 31 years, and I still love being in the classroom with students. But there's always the idea that maybe another challenge would be exciting if it were to ever arise. So I'm not going to say it wouldn't happen, but I can say that I'm not actively intending to at this point or seeking it out. I don't know if that's
that helps, and I appreciate your honesty on that. Sure. And all of us will keep our eyes open, perhaps, for the name of Dr. Ralph Brockett and what some other role down the road might be. Who knows? Maybe you could be a college president or something like that. Well,
No,
you're shaking your head. I can see on the little screen that I'm looking at. But as we end this interview, Ralph, and I certainly thank you for participating and taking time to participate with us. But one of the things that we're going to be talking about by the time this interview is aired, we may already have talked about it, the whole notion of ethics and higher education. And some of the students, depending upon what they do in their learning plan or contract, they may actually have decided to create a statement of ethics or a code of ethics related to themselves as a higher education administrator or a potential higher education administrator. And as I think they will know, you as first author and I as second author, we created a book on ethics a few years ago, and we've been able to share that information in various ways at conferences and presentations and so on. And almost every class that I teach, I'm usually talking in some way about that book and the whole notion of ethics. As we close off, do you have any final thoughts in terms of the whole notion of ethics and how a higher education administrator, leader should be thinking about that topic?
Well, actually, I'm going to be working this weekend and maybe even some today. I'm teaching an ethics class, ethics in adult education, and I'm teaching it online for the first time. So I'm going to be preparing some stuff and doing something like what we're doing here. And, and as you know, I'm hoping that you'll come and join us either via Skype or in some form during the course. But I think ethics is such an important topic. But I also think that that one of the things that we talked about in the book that's important is that ethics not be used as a hammer to punish people or to be enforcing or punitive, but rather as a way of creating an environment where people can do their best work and do good things. And I know that sounds kind of naive, but when you think about it, if that's what we're shooting for is to do good work, then I think ethical practice is foundational to that. And for all of you who are in the class, if you get a chance to look at our book, or if you go to Roger's website, he has his chapter on developing a philosophy statement is on there. And I think that will be really helpful to have and to take a look at. So, I would be happy if anyone who sees this video, if you want to contact me at some point, or if you have questions, Roger has my email, or you can look me up on Google. I'll be glad to respond, and we'd be happy to do that. But I really do think ethics is an important area. I think sometimes it gets kind of looked at as in a negative way because we have people like certain politicians, and we say, well, that's unethical, and there are extremes. Most ethical dilemmas that come up aren't about wrong versus wrong, or right versus wrong, rather. They're cases of right versus right, and you need to make a choice between two things that are the right thing to do, but which one is the most right under the circumstances? And there's a lot of complexity there, and I hope you get a chance to talk about that throughout your program. I think it's an important topic that, again, isn't necessarily worthy of one course, even though we do offer an ethics course. We talk about ethics in most of our courses as well. But
well, Ralph, on behalf of the class, I thank you very much. It's been great having you here, and on behalf of the students, I really appreciate your being a part of this interview today. So take care of yourself.
I'm glad to have been here. Wish you well with your class, and Roger, thanks for inviting me.